Close your eyes for a moment and picture Ireland. Rolling green hills, ancient stone circles rising from the mist, ruined castles standing silent against a grey sky. Now imagine it's the eve of November, Samhain, and something in the darkness ahead of you is moving. You think you know the creatures of Irish folklore, the little man with his pot of gold, the wailing woman in the night, but what you know is barely the surface. Because the real stories, the older ones, are stranger, darker, and far more fascinating than any greeting card or holiday parade would have you believe. Tonight, we're going beneath the postcard. We're going into the actual folklore. Welcome back to Golden Cattle Media, where folklore, history, and legend intertwine. If you enjoy stories of hauntings, folk heroes, and forgotten pasts, consider subscribing and stay with us tonight, because this one goes deep. To understand Irish folklore, you first have to understand the world it was born in. Ireland is an island shaped by isolation and invasion in equal measure. For thousands of years, before Christianity arrived in the 5th century, the Irish people lived within a rich oral tradition. Stories passed down from druid to student, from grandmother to grandchild, around firelight on long winter nights. These weren't fairy tales in the modern sense, they were explanations, they were warnings, they were history dressed as something else. The landscape itself seemed to invite the supernatural. Rolling hills concealed the entrances to the otherworld, the realm of the ancient gods who had retreated underground when mortals claimed the surface. Rivers marked boundaries between the living and the dead. Certain hills were said to be hollow, certain crossroads were dangerous after dark. And into this landscape, this ancient, mist-soaked, story-saturated island, came 4 figures that would endure for 1,000 years and beyond. You know their names, but you don't know their stories. At least not yet. Let's start with the most famous, and perhaps the most misunderstood, of Ireland's supernatural inhabitants, the Leprechaun. You've seen him on cereal boxes, you've seen him in parades, but strip away the green suit, the shamrock, and the cheeky grin, and what you find underneath is something considerably older and considerably stranger. The Leprechaun is, at his core, a fairy cobbler. He belongs to the otherworld, that parallel realm of the fae folk, and his occupation is mending shoes. Specifically, the shoes of the fairies who have danced them to pieces. And if you've ever wondered why you might hear faint rhythmic tapping from beneath a mossy stone or a hedgerow, now you know. That tap, tap, tap is not the wind, that is the leprechaun at work. But here's where it gets interesting. The leprechaun you think you know, that green-suited, red-haired, buckle-hatted figure, is largely an American creation born from the Great Famine. When over 1 million Irish people emigrated to the United States in the 1840s, they brought their folklore with them. And in America, that folklore evolved, blended, and eventually became a costume. The original leprechaun wore a red coat, a single-breasted coat with 7 buttons in each row. He wore a cocked hat, sometimes a tricorn. He stood 2 to 3 feet tall. He was elderly in appearance, and he was always alone. A solitary creature, considered neutral by fae standards, neither malevolent nor benevolent, just self-interested. Now, the gold. The leprechaun is said to possess a hoard, either ancient treasure from the Viking invasions of Ireland, which began around 795 CE, or the fairy coins paid to him by his cobbler clients. If you ever want to claim that gold, the rules of engagement are very specific. First, you must hear him before you see him. That cobbling sound is your only warning. Second, you must grab him without warning. He cannot escape a firm grip. The moment your hand closes around him, he is bound. Third, and this is the critical one, you must maintain eye contact. Unbroken, constant eye contact, because the moment you look away, for even a fraction of a second, he vanishes. Without a sound, without a trace, as though he were never there. If you hold him, he must grant 3 wishes or reveal the location of his gold. But the leprechaun did not survive this long by being easily outwitted. Irish folklore is full of stories of clever men who thought they had him. One tale tells of a farmer who forced the leprechaun to reveal his gold, buried beneath a specific thistle in a great field. The farmer had no shovel, so he tied his red garter to the thistle to mark it and ran back for tools. When he returned, every single thistle in the field was wearing a red garter. Every one. He never found the gold. But the leprechaun, for all his trickery, is a relatively gentle creature. What comes next is something else entirely. She does not kill, she does not haunt, she does not curse. She simply knows. Banshee, from the Irish meaning woman of the fairy mound, is one of the most ancient and most chilling figures in Irish mythology. The earliest references appear in medieval manuscripts dating back to the 8th through the 12th centuries CE. Those scholars believe the oral tradition is considerably older, rooted in pre-Christian beliefs about the boundary between life and death. She appears in 3 forms, and all 3 are terrifying in different ways. Sometimes she's a beautiful young woman, pale and luminous, standing at the edge of a river, washing burial shrouds. Sometimes she is a middle-aged matron, dressed in gray, her eyes red from weeping. And sometimes she is a haggard old crone, wild hair and hollow-eyed, her face the face of grief itself. And she is wailing. That sound, the keening, the unearthly mourning cry that carries across fields and through walls and wakes children from sleep, is not a weapon, it's a warning. Because the Banshee does not choose her targets randomly, she attaches herself to specific families, ancient Gaelic families, those with the prefix O or Mac in their names. Families with deep roots in Irish soil. And when one of their members is about to die, she comes. She is not the cause of death, she is its herald, its announcement. Think about that for a moment. The Banshee is not malevolent. She is grief. She mourns before mourning begins. The tradition of keening, ritual wailing at death, was a living practice in Ireland well into the 20th century. Professional keening women were hired to wail at funerals, giving voice to communal grief in a way that was considered essential. The Catholic Church largely suppressed this practice by 1900s, viewing it as too pagan, too raw, but in the Banshee, that tradition survives. The phrase, "she heard the Banshee," remains in common use in Ireland today, meaning a person had a premonition of death. Not a metaphor, a memory. Where the Banshee is defined by grief, the next figure is defined by something altogether more unpredictable. The Puca doesn't mourn, the Puca plays. The Puca is, in many ways, the most dangerous figure in Irish folklore. Not because it kills, but because you never know what it will do. References to the Puca appear from at least the 11th century in Irish literature, and its name almost certainly derives from the Old Norse word puki, a mischievous demon, a linguistic fingerprint of the Viking Age, when Norse settlers and Irish communities mingled, traded, and exchanged their stories. Puca is a shapeshifter. Its most common form is a great dark horse, black as a starless night, with wild amber eyes and a mane that moves even when there is no wind. But it can also appear as a goat, a rabbit, an eagle, or a goblin-like figure crouching at a crossroads. It can speak in human language, and it has opinions. Now, if you encounter a Puca in horse form and it invites you to climb on its back, do not. Because the Puca's ride is not a gentle trot, it will carry you at terrifying speeds across the mountains, over cliffs, through rivers, until you are lost, disoriented, shaking, and deposited somewhere very far from where you started. If you're lucky, that's the end of it. If you're not lucky, well, folklore doesn't always finish those sentences. The Puca has a deep connection to Samhain, what we now call Halloween. On the night of November 1st, the Puca is said to roam freely, fouling or trampling any crops that hadn't yet been harvested. In rural Ireland, it was customary to leave the last of the harvest, the, quote, Puca's share, deliberately unharvested as an offering. A kind of tribute, a way of saying, we know you're there, please don't come for us. The tradition survived in parts of rural Ireland into the 20th century. Regional traditions vary dramatically. In parts of Munster, the Puca was seen as potentially benevolent, a trickster who might actually leave good fortune. In other counties, it was viewed as purely malicious. The ambiguity is perhaps the point. The Puca represents the wildness of the natural world, the parts of the landscape that cannot be domesticated, predicted, or reasoned with. Pool na Puca, meaning Pool of the Puca, is a waterfall and reservoir in County Wicklow that still bears the spirit's name today. And the warning, quote, the Puca's abroad tonight, was once a common phrase used to keep children indoors after Samhain. But Ireland's mythology is not only populated by spirits and tricksters, there's one figure who stands above the rest, not as a supernatural being, but something perhaps more powerful. A hero, a man who became a legend, who became a myth. His name is pronounced Fionn Mac Cumhaill, and if any single figure can be said to embody the soul of Irish mythology, it's him. Fionn Mac Cumhaill is the central figure of the Fenian cycle, one of the 4 great cycles of Irish mythology. The earliest Fenian texts date back to the 7th and 8th century CE, though the oral tradition places Fionn in a legendary 3rd century Ireland reaches back further still, into a time before written records existed. Fionn was the leader of the Fina, an elite band of warrior poets in service to the High King of Ireland. To join the Fina, a warrior had to pass extraordinary tests. Compose poetry while being chased through a forest, stand knee-deep in a pit, and defend himself against 9 spearmen with only a shield and a hazel rod, run through the woods without breaking a single branch. Skill was not enough, intelligence was not enough, you had to be both. But Finn's defining characteristic was not his strength, it was his wisdom, and the story of how he gained it is one of the strangest in all of Irish mythology. As a young boy, Finn apprenticed to a druid poet named Finnegas, who had spent years trying to catch the salmon of knowledge, a fish said to have absorbed all the wisdom of the world by eating the hazelnuts that fell from the trees surrounding the Well of Wisdom. One day, Finnegas finally caught the salmon and told young Finn to cook it, but not to taste it. While cooking it, a blister formed on the salmon's skin. Finn pressed down on it with his thumb, and, without thinking, put his burned thumb in his mouth. In that instant, all the knowledge of the world flooded into him. He saw everything that had ever been, and everything that was yet to come. And from that moment forward, whenever Finn needed wisdom, he had only to bite his thumb, and the knowledge was his. That is an image. A young boy, a burned thumb, something vast and ancient flooding in. That's endured for over 1,000 years. Finn's deeds were almost too many to recount. He slew Eileen, a fire-breathing demon who burned the sacred hall of Tara to the ground every Samhain. He led the Fianna into battles across Ireland and into Scotland. He fell into a tragic love triangle. His intended bride, Grenwia, fled with his finest warrior, Diarmuid, on their wedding night, leading to one of Ireland's great tragic romances. But it's perhaps his physical legacy that is the most astonishing. The Giant's Causeway in County Antrim, that extraordinary formation of interlocking basalt columns, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, is attributed in folklore to Finn. He built it, they say, as a bridge to Scotland to fight a Scottish giant named Benadonner. Some scholars, notably T.F. O'Reilly, have argued that Finn has roots in an older Celtic deity, possibly connected to the god Lugh, that the warrior hero we know is a human echo of something divine. Others treat him as a legendary exaggeration of real warrior chieftains who once walked Irish soil. In Scotland, he became Fingal, the hero of James Macpherson's Ossian poems in the 1760s, which helped ignite the Romantic movement's fascination with Celtic mythology. Fingal's Cave, on the Scottish island of Staffa, a basalt sea cave whose columns mirror those of the Giant Causeway, inspired Mendelssohn's Hebrides Overture in 1830. Piece of Irish mythology transformed into a symphony. James Joyce referenced Finn throughout Finnegan's Wake. The title itself is a Finn pun. Finn again's wake, a giant sleeping beneath the land waiting to rise again. What's fascinating about all four of these figures is the question of what they were originally for. Folklore is rarely random. Every legend carries the weight of the culture that created it. The Leprechaun may encode a genuine folk memory of Viking treasure hoards. Ireland was extensively raided and settled by the Norse peoples from 795 CE onward, and great quantities of silver and gold were buried for safekeeping and never recovered. Banshee may reflect the genuine psychological weight of grief in a society that lost people young, often without warning. The Puca may be the personification of unpredictable natural forces, storms, failed harvests, the wildness that cannot be tamed, and Fionn Mac Cumhaill may just be this distillation of an entire culture's longing for a golden age of warrior poets, of strength paired with wisdom, Ireland as it wished it had been. Scholar Daithí O'Hagan, who wrote the definitive modern study of Fionn Mac Cumhaill, argues that the figure has always served as a mirror, reflecting whatever a particular era most needed to believe about itself. That may be true of all of them. These are not dead stories. They are alive in the landscape, the language, and the calendar. The Giant's Causeway draws over 1 million visitors a year, a UNESCO World Heritage Site where the mythological story is told alongside the geological one. The Púca Festival in County Meath, established in 2019, is now Ireland's largest autumn music festival, deliberately timed to Samhain. The National Leprechaun Museum in Dublin opened in 2010, and in Carlingford, County Louth, a leprechaun colony is officially protected under European Communities ruling from 2009, a legally recognized EU-protected habitat. And Banshee lore lives on in the UCD Folklore archives, where hundreds of accounts were recorded by Irish Folklore Commission between the 1930s and 1960s. Ordinary people in ordinary villages describing exactly what they heard on the night someone in their family was about to die. Modern storytelling has embraced all four figures, sometimes faithfully, sometimes not. The Banshee appears in Yeats, in Irish Gothic literature, in the 1964 film Darby O'Gill and the Little People. She became a Marvel Comics character. The Leprechaun spawned a horror franchise beginning in 1993 and somehow also Lucky Charms cereal. The Puca became the towering invisible rabbit Harvey in the 1950 James Stewart film, a Puca analog so close that Irish audiences reportedly recognized it immediately. And Wolfwalkers, the 2020 animated film from Cartoon Saloon, deeply drew on Fenian-era Ireland to create something both ancient and entirely new. Here's what strikes me about all of these stories. They resist simple readings. The Leprechaun is not just a comic figure, he is a reminder that cleverness always has its limits. The Banshee is not evil, she is grief personified, and grief is inevitable. Puca is not a monster, it is the wildness of the world which cannot be predicted, only respected. And Fionn Mac Cumhaill is not a superhero. He is a man who gained wisdom by accident, who led imperfectly, who lost as often as he won. Perhaps that is why they have lasted so long, because they are honest. They do not pretend the world is safe, they do not pretend that cleverness always wins or that heroes are invincible. They say, this world is strange and old and powerful, and your best hope is to pay attention. So what do you think? Folk memory or pure imagination? Warning or wonder? Let me know in the comments. I genuinely love to hear if any of these legends are part of your own family's stories. If you enjoyed this journey into Irish folklore, give the video a like and subscribe for more stories from the fog between history and legend. We've got plenty more waiting for you. Until next time, history remembers, but folklore never forgets.